He was just trying to fix a flat and make rent. She was supposed to be walking down the aisle. But when their paths crossed on the side of an old back road, what began as a ride to nowhere became the road to everything neither of them thought they deserved. Love doesn't always arrive dressed for the part. Sometimes it shows up muddy, late, and still healing. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The road had narrowed an hour ago. No signs, no shoulder, just cracked asphalt threading through farmland that looked more abandoned than owned. The kind of stretch Evan hated, the kind where, if something went wrong, no one noticed for days. He checked the rearview mirror for the third time in 5 minutes. Mia was still asleep, head tilted against the window, a smear of peanut butter on her cheek from the gas station sandwich she'd only half eaten. Her shoelaces were untied again. He made a mental note to fix them before the interview. Then came the pop. Not loud, not cinematic, just a soft, sudden thunk that made the truck jerk right. Evan's hands tightened on the wheel as the vehicle listed, pulling toward the ditch. He eased it over, heart thudding, gravel crackling under the tires until they rolled to a stop beneath a sun-bleached billboard for a campground that had probably closed 10 years ago. He got out slow, cursing under his breath, wiping sweat from his brow with the hem of his t-shirt. The heat was already climbing, thick and pulsing, like it was coming up from the ground itself. The passenger side tire was toast, shredded at the sidewall like it had been slashed. He crouched, ran a hand over the rubber, checked for anything salvageable. There wasn't. He opened the back, dug through the milk crate of tools and spare parts he kept wedged behind the seats. The patch kit was gone. Used up on that plumbing truck in Greeley 2 weeks ago, he'd meant to replace it, meant to do a lot of things. He sat on the bumper, head in his hands, the weight of every unpaid bill pressing against his spine. He was going to be late. Probably already was. "Dad?" Mia's voice was small. She stood at the window, blinking against the light, hair tangled from the nap. "We're not there yet?" He looked up at her, tried to smile. "Just a little bump, kiddo. Stay inside, okay?" She nodded, trusting him in the way only kids do when they don't yet understand how thin the thread is. Evan stood, kicked a stone across the road, and stared into the heat shimmer ahead. He was out of patches, out of options, and maybe, just maybe, out of time. The first thing he saw was the veil, or what was left of it, torn, dragging across the gravel, caught briefly on a low branch before slipping free and trailing behind her like it belonged to another life. She came out of the tree line like a ghost, barefoot, slow-moving, bouquet limp in one hand, the other clutching the skirt of a wedding dress that was stained brown at the hem. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes, they were hollow, not dazed, not panicked, just emptied out, like the part that was supposed to hold emotion had been drained clean. Evan stood by the truck, still wiping his hands with the same rag he always used, smudged with grease, streaked now with dirt from the roadside. He watched her for a second too long, wondering if she was real. She looked like something from a dream he wasn't supposed to remember. She didn't look at him, didn't flinch, just kept walking, arms tight to her body like she was holding herself in place, like the slightest wrong move might splinter her. He cleared his throat. "You, need help?" She stopped then, barely, her head tilted in his direction. Her eyes met his, bloodshot and rimmed with mascara that had given up hours ago. She said nothing. He glanced back at Mia in the truck, still half asleep with headphones in, then back to the woman. "I've got room," he said, softer now. "If you need a ride, I'm headed toward, well, somewhere." Still nothing. He looked around. No car, no other footprints. Just a worn trail through the brush behind her and the broken silence between them. The kind that made your skin itch, with the feeling that whatever happened to her had just happened. Maybe minutes ago, maybe less. She took one step forward, then another. And when she reached the truck, she didn't ask questions. Just opened the passenger door, lifted the ruined dress, and climbed in like this was a ride she'd been waiting on her whole life. Evan stood there a second longer, heart knocking around in his chest like it was trying to answer a question he hadn't asked yet. Then he got in, turned the key, and pulled back onto the road. She still hadn't said a word, but her silence filled the cab like thunder. The hum of the tires on the broken asphalt filled the cab like static, constant, low, the kind of sound that usually faded into the background. But now every note of it pressed into Evan's chest, louder than it should have been. The woman beside him hadn't moved much. She sat stiff, bouquet clutched to her lap like it was still heavy with meaning, even though half the petals had browned and fallen. Her dress, once probably white and perfect, was now creased and spotted with mud, lace ripped at the side like she'd caught it on a fence, or hadn't cared if she did. She didn't cry, she didn't talk, just stared straight ahead, eyes pinned to the horizon, like looking at him might break something she wasn't ready to name. Evan kept his hands tight on the wheel, every instinct screaming to say something, to ask, to offer, to make the space less unbearable. But he didn't. Not yet. Maybe not at all. He didn't know what she'd run from, but he knew enough about running to recognize the look. The way people sat just a little too still, like movement might invite collapse. He glanced in the rear view. Mia was starting to stir, her head bobbing, as she sat up and rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. She blinked once, then looked toward the passenger seat and frowned. "Dad?" she whispered, leaning forward between the seats. "Who's that?" Evan opened his mouth, then shut it again. Before he could find words, Mia spoke again. "Is she a princess?" Evan blinked. "What?" "She looks like one," Mia said simply, gazing at the woman's dress with wide, unfiltered eyes. But she forgot her shoes. There was a beat, a long, uncomfortable one, where Evan wasn't sure what would happen. Then the woman let out a breath, a short one, almost a laugh, almost a sob. Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close enough to shift something in the air between them. She glanced down at her bare feet, dirty and scratched. "Yeah," she murmured, voice raw and unused. "I guess I did." Mia smiled. Evan caught the woman's profile as she spoke, and for the first time she looked human again, not a ghost, not a question mark, just a girl in a dress, riding shotgun in someone else's truck, heading nowhere on purpose. The silence came back, but this time it wasn't as sharp. The gas station sat like an afterthought on the side of the road, half-lit sign flickering, paint peeling from the awning, a single pump still working and angled just enough to look like it wanted to give up. Evan pulled in on instinct more than necessity. The truck still had a quarter tank, but he needed something else. Air, space, an excuse to slow down before whatever this was became something he couldn't put back. He parked beside the pump, engine ticking into silence, and glanced over. She hadn't moved in miles, just kept that bouquet in her lap, fingers white-knuckled around it like letting go might mean admitting something out loud. He cleared his throat, nodding toward the small concrete building ahead. "There's a restroom inside, coffee too, not the good kind, but it's hot." She didn't answer, just blinked once and opened the door. Inside, the place smelled like burnt sugar and diesel. A tired teenage clerk leaned on the counter, scrolling his phone, not even pretending to care. Evan grabbed 2 coffees, black for him, cream and sugar for her, though he had no real reason to know her preference. It just felt right. By the time she came out of the restroom, the change was jarring. The dress was gone. In its place were faded jeans and a hoodie that hung off one shoulder like it had been borrowed from someone taller. Her hair was wet at the ends, pulled back in a makeshift tie. She looked younger, smaller, but not softer. The sadness didn't leave with the dress. It clung to her, the same way storm clouds linger after the worst of it has passed. Her eyes met his across the aisle of beef jerky and postcards, and for a split second she looked like she might say something, but she didn't. She just took the coffee he offered, murmured a quiet thanks, and turned toward the window. Back at the pump, Mia had her forehead pressed to the glass, drawing hearts in the fog. She waved when she saw them. Aubrey waved back, the tiniest smile cracking through the exhaustion. Evan watched her a moment longer, then opened the door and slid behind the wheel. The gas tank clicked full. No one said a word as they pulled back onto the road. But something had shifted, small, invisible, and heavy with the weight of someone who'd taken off a costume and wasn't quite sure what was left underneath. They passed the last road sign 10 miles ago, just a rusted sheet of metal riddled with buckshot and years. The highway had turned narrow and tired, lined with pines that leaned like they were listening. Evan kept his hand steady on the wheel, knuckles pale from tension he hadn't admitted yet. Aubrey hadn't spoken much since the gas station. She'd sipped her coffee too slow, like drinking it gave her something to do with her hands, something that didn't feel like unraveling. Mia had drifted off again in the back seat, tangled in her seatbelt, one hand still clutching the little sketch pad she took everywhere. Evan glanced at her in the rear view, then back at the road just as Aubrey spoke, soft and clipped. "There's a place up ahead," she said. "You can drop me there." He looked at her, eyebrows drawn. "A place?" She pointed vaguely toward the right, toward a hand-painted sign half hidden in the overgrowth. Rosewood Inn. Vacancy. The word vacancy was missing a few letters. Evan frowned. "That place is barely standing." She didn't blink. "Doesn't need to be standing long." The truck slowed anyway. His foot wasn't sure what it wanted. He pulled into the gravel lot, headlights catching on weeds that had swallowed half the fence. The porch light flickered once and died. The front desk window was smeared and dark. "You're not staying here," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Her face shifted, just barely. "It's fine." "It's not," he said. "That place isn't safe for anyone, especially not alone, especially not tonight." She turned to him, expression unreadable. "It's not your problem." He looked at her then, really looked. Mud still clung to the hem of her jeans. Her hoodie sleeves were damp. Her eyes had the kind of glassy distance you only see in people who've spent the last few hours trying not to shatter. "I've got a couch," he said. "It folds out, it's clean, and my daughter's in the house, so nothing weird, just safer than this." She hesitated. Evan saw the calculation happen behind her eyes, the pride, the exhaustion, the fear of accepting something she hadn't asked for. Finally she nodded, once, barely more than a breath. "Just for the night," she said. "Just for the night," he echoed, pulling back onto the road. But in his gut he knew better. People didn't run this far just to sleep and leave. The night settled slow, like it was hesitant to fall all the way. The house creaked in the way old places do, shifting under its own weight, joints popping with temperature changes and memory. Evan had laid the couch out earlier, clean sheets pulled tight, one of Mia's extra blankets folded on the armrest. Aubrey hadn't said much when she stepped inside, just offered a quiet thank you and carried her coffee cup to the sink like she needed a task to make her feel useful. Now she sat curled at the end of the couch, bare feet tucked under her, hoodie sleeves pushed to her elbows. The dim lamplight caught on the ink along her forearm, faint lines, dark curves, numbers too precise for decoration. Mia noticed them first. "What's that?" she asked, sleep-heavy, from her perch on the stairs. She hadn't gone to bed yet. She always lingered when strangers were in the house. Aubrey looked down at the marks like she'd forgotten they were there. "Just maps." Mia patted closer. "Where to?" Aubrey hesitated. "Nowhere, really. Or roads I shouldn't have taken." Mia blinked at her. "But you took them?" A nod. "Yeah." "Did they all go bad?" Aubrey looked up then. Her eyes caught Evan's, just for a flicker, raw, tired, exposed. "Some just didn't go anywhere," she said. Mia stood quiet for a beat, then reached out and gently touched the edge of one of the lines, just with her finger. "You should add new ones, better ones." Aubrey swallowed, nodded again, and managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe I will." Later, after Mia had finally gone to bed and the house had gone still, Evan passed by the hallway leading to the guest room. The door was cracked, just enough to hear the sound of quiet unraveling. Not sobbing, just the kind of slow, deliberate crying that people do when they're trying to make sure no one hears. The kind that comes after you've held it in too long. He stood there, frozen, hand brushing the frame, didn't knock, didn't speak. He just let her have the space to fall apart, because some storms don't want shelter. They just want the dignity of falling in peace. Morning came with a haze thick enough to blur the edges of everything. Mist clung to the grass outside like it didn't want to lift, like the night hadn't quite let go. Evan was already up, boots on, before the sun had cleared the hills. He made coffee black and too strong, just the way he liked it when there was something he didn't want to feel. Aubrey was quiet when she came down the stairs, hair damp from a sink rinse, hoodie sleeves pushed to her elbows again, same jeans from yesterday. She didn't look rested, just more put together, like armor was easier to wear than fatigue. Mia had already gone. Neighbor's kid took her on Thursdays when Evan needed a job lead. Aubrey sat at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the mug he set in front of her. Neither of them said much. They didn't have to. The silence between them had become something almost comfortable, like a bruise that still hurts but no longer bleeds. She stood after 2 sips, nodded once, and said, "I should go." He followed her to the truck, keys in hand, jaw tight. The drive was short, 10, maybe 12 minutes, but every second of it felt like a door creaking slowly shut. She looked out the window the whole time, fingers curled tight in her lap. When he pulled up in front of the same sad-looking inn from the night before, the vacancy sign still flickering like a bad promise, she didn't move right away. "This is fine," she said, barely above a whisper. He nodded, tried to say something, couldn't find the words. He wanted to tell her the couch was still there, that she could stay one more night, that he wasn't trying to save her, but he didn't want her to vanish either. Instead, he said, "Good luck." She opened the door, slid out slow, then turned back just once. "Thank you," she said. He watched her walk across the lot, bouquet still in hand, though the petals were nearly gone now. She didn't look back. The door shut behind her. He drove away without checking the mirror, but every mile felt like he was leaving something behind that hadn't even started yet. The wrench slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor, a sharp metallic crack that echoed too loud in the garage. Evan cursed under his breath and bent to retrieve it, grease smudging the cuff of his sleeve. He hadn't missed a bolt like that in years, not since back when he was learning with his dad's calloused hand gripping his shoulder, correcting every turn. But his mind wasn't in the engine bay. It was in a run-down inn with a flickering sign and a door that might still be closed. 3 days had passed, no call. Not that he expected one. They hadn't exchanged numbers. He didn't know her last name. She didn't know his middle one. But still, her silence itched beneath his skin like an unanswered question. He dropped the wrench again. Let it stay there this time. By the end of the day, he'd checked the gas station near the inn twice under the excuse of grabbing coffee. The second time, the clerk gave him a look. Evan didn't bother with small talk, just left the coffee untouched on the dash until it went cold. He hadn't told Mia anything, just said the princess with no shoes had gone on a new adventure. It was the flyer at the feed store that made his heart stutter. A paper sign taped to the bulletin board, half covered by a lost dog notice. New hire at Rosie's Diner. Ask for Aubrey. He stood there longer than he should have, eyes fixed on those words like they'd shift if he stared hard enough. He didn't go inside, not that day. But he drove past the diner, twice. Inside, Aubrey wore a borrowed apron and a practiced expression. Her hair was tied back, strands slipping loose around her temples. She moved like someone who didn't want to be noticed, but already had been. The regulars whispered, "That's her, the one who left him, or got left, depending on the version." She kept her head down, took orders, refilled mugs, thanked the rude ones anyway. Behind the counter, her smile was thin but precise. like she'd practiced it in a mirror until it stopped showing the cracks, like survival. And Evan, he watched from the curb, truck idling, hands gripping the wheel tight enough to whiten his knuckles. He didn't go in. But the door stayed unlocked. The school gym smelled like popcorn and floor polish, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes and didn't wash out easy. Parents milled around half-hearted booths, dunk tanks, and bake sale tables, all of it stitched together with cheap streamers and too loud music playing from a speaker that buzzed on every bass note. Evan had only come because Mia begged. Her school art was being displayed near the back wall, crayon hearts, stick figures, and a giant son wearing sunglasses. He stood off to the side, sipping warm lemonade from a paper cup, scanning for Mia. She'd wandered toward the snack tables with two other girls, chattering about glitter glue and something to do with frogs. He almost missed the moment it happened. Mia froze. Her whole body stiffened, plastic cup halfway to her mouth. Then she bolted. Not a run, more like a beeline pulled by something invisible. Evan set his drink down, heart suddenly alert, legs already following. She weaved between tables, past the raffle wheel and the PTA moms handing out flyers, and stopped dead in front of the woman carrying a tray of empty punch cups. "Aubrey!" Mia shouted. Aubrey turned, tray tilting, eyes wide. The cups rattled but didn't fall. And then Mia was hugging her, not shy, not cautious, just arms flung around her middle like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You came back," she whispered, burying her face into the borrowed apron. Aubrey's hand hovered midair before finally settling on Mia's back. She knelt slowly, pulling the girl in, her face folding into something Evan hadn't seen in weeks. Not the tight, practiced smile from behind a diner counter, not the distant calm from the truck. Something softer, realer. She looked up as Evan reached them, her eyes locked on his, a dozen things unsaid between them. "I never left," she said. The words didn't come dramatic, no sweeping violins or teary reuniting, just a truth so small it cracked something open in Evan's chest. He looked at her, standing there in someone else's apron, holding his daughter like she belonged. And for the first time, the ground beneath his feet didn't feel like it was shifting. It felt like it might hold. The first time he came in, it was early enough that the diner still smelled more like bleach than bacon. The only customers were two men in dusty ball caps, nursing black coffee and staring at the muted news. Evan slid into the booth by the window, same one he always took when he used to come, before everything got loud inside his own life. Before her. Aubrey noticed him the second the bell over the door rang, but she didn't flinch. Just tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and refilled someone's decaf before walking over. She didn't ask what he wanted, just scribbled it down. Eggs over medium. Black coffee. No toast. And when she set the plate in front of him, their hands almost touched, but didn't. "Thanks," he said, voice low. She nodded. "Let me know if it's wrong." It wasn't. The eggs were perfect. But he barely tasted them. Too much of him was focused on how her voice hadn't changed, how her shoes scuffed against the linoleum in a rhythm that somehow soothed the knot in his gut. He watched her move between tables, careful, efficient, not smiling, but not cold either, like she'd carved out a space that didn't demand more than she was willing to give. He left a tip big enough to be noticed, but not enough to be embarrassing. She didn't comment on it. The second time he came in, it was Wednesday. She looked surprised, just for a flicker. He didn't mention the last time. She didn't ask why he was back. "Same?" she asked. He nodded. She brought eggs, same plate, same seat. Same silence stretched between them, wide and quiet and pulsing with things neither of them were ready to say. They never talked about the dress, or the truck ride, or the way Mia had clung to her like something steady. They just repeated the rhythm. Eggs, coffee, goodbye. Like it was some fragile truce that neither of them dared disturb. But when he left the third time, she slipped a folded napkin onto the edge of the plate. No note. No number. Just a single line drawn in pen. A road with no name, curving gently towards something just out of frame. He carried it home without unfolding it again. Some conversations didn't need words, not yet. The town was small enough that stories didn't need to be true to be told. They just needed to be heard once, and they'd echo through grocery aisles, behind gas pumps, through cracked open screen doors, and low-hummed phone calls. The first whisper came at the market. Evan was reaching for a bag of dog food when he caught two voices from the baking aisle, low but sharp enough to carry. She was wearing the dress when he picked her up, I heard. Full-on veil, like something out of a movie. No ring, though, and no groom, just the mechanic and his kid. The rustle of flour bags, a soft, amused scoff. Can't say I blame her. Poor man's been alone too long. He didn't say anything, didn't turn, just gripped the cart handle tighter and walked toward the checkout with his head down and his jaw locked. Aubrey heard it too. She always did. At the diner, it drifted in with the morning rush, slipped between coffee refills and pie slices like steam off the griddle. No one said anything to her face. Not exactly. But she felt the shift. Customers who once looked past her now stared too long. A woman in pearls left half her meal untouched and asked the owner if someone else could bring the check. "She's the runaway," someone said near the counter. "Ran out on her vows and ran straight into his truck." Aubrey didn't flinch, just wiped down the same spot on the counter 3 times and smiled like it didn't matter, like she didn't hear. But she did. Every word settled somewhere under her ribs, thick and hard and familiar. Evan came in that night, late, sat in his usual booth, ordered the eggs. When she brought them over, she didn't speak, neither did he. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she held the coffee pot tighter than she needed to. He thought about saying something, about defending her, about telling the town what they didn't know, that she hadn't run away. She'd walked toward silence because silence had felt safer than promises made with shaky hands. But he didn't, because saying it out loud would mean claiming it, claiming her. And he wasn't sure the town or his heart was ready for that. So instead, he just nodded once, took the coffee, ate the eggs. But it stung, both of them, quietly, relentlessly, like splinters no one would help pull out. The storm came in sideways, wind snarling through the alleys, rain pelting the diner windows like it was personal. By morning, the sky had cleared, but the damage had settled where no one could see it. The basement had flooded overnight, not the dramatic kind you saw on the news, just enough to soak through everything and leave the air heavy with the smell of mildew and rot. Aubrey stood at the top of the stairs, mop in one hand, a flashlight clenched between her teeth. The water had drained by the time she'd gotten there, but what it left behind was worse. Ruined crates of supplies, soggy cardboard, mud tracked up the steps. She sighed, loud enough to echo. Then she went down. Evan showed up without being called. Word had already spread, the way it always did in towns like this. By the time he knocked on the back door, he was already wet, rain still coming down in lazy, cold sheets, soaking through the shoulders of his worn jacket. "You heard?" she asked, stepping aside to let him in. He nodded. "Brought a pump and a prayer." She almost smiled at that. They worked in silence for the first hour. The pump gurgled and spit. The mop squeaked against the slick floor, and the only conversation came from the occasional grunt or curse as something too heavy shifted wrong. She kept brushing a wet strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. He kept pretending not to notice how it stuck to her cheek. Then the mop broke. Not the handle, the head, snapped clear off, the soggy cotton flopping uselessly to the side like it had finally surrendered. Aubrey stared at it. Evan raised an eyebrow, and then, without warning, she started laughing. It wasn't delicate or careful. It was sharp and sudden and loud enough to bounce off the basement walls. She doubled over, wiping at her eyes with the edge of her soaked sleeve, laughing like someone who hadn't in a long, long time. Evan just leaned against the wall and let her. Then he laughed too, quiet at first, then louder, when she handed him the mop handle like it was a sword. "This is the worst," she said between gasps. "Seriously, I have mud in places I didn't think mud could reach. You should see your face. You should see yours." And in that moment, standing in ankle-deep water, surrounded by the wreckage of a storm and a pile of ruined supplies, it didn't feel like cleanup. It felt like something being rebuilt from the inside out. It was tucked in the bottom of Mia's backpack, folded twice, and half crumpled between a math worksheet and a permission slip he didn't remember signing. Evan found it while digging for her lunchbox, fingers brushing paper that felt heavier than it should have. He unfolded it slowly, sitting at the edge of the kitchen table where the light was soft and too early to be warm. The drawing was simple: stick figures, sun in the corner with long eyelashes, trees that looked more like lollipops than anything real. But in the center, there were 3 people. One with short, square shoulders and a blue shirt, him. One with a messy brown halo of scribbled hair, Mia. And one in a long hoodie, a soft arc of color around her hands, like she was holding something invisible, Aubrey. Above them, in crooked, careful handwriting, were the words "Me and Dad and Aubrey, our maybe friend." He stared at it longer than he wanted to. His coffee had gone cold. The silence in the room felt thick, the kind that settles into your chest before you realize it's there. He didn't know what bothered him more, that she was in the drawing, or that she was still a maybe. That night, he forgot to take it out of his pocket before heading to the diner. It slipped free when he reached for his wallet to pay, landing on the counter like it belonged there. Aubrey noticed before he could hide it. She bent to pick it up, eyebrows lifting just slightly as she took in the crayon lines and shaky letters. "Mia?" she asked, voice unreadable. Evan nodded once. "School project." She looked at the page a second longer, then handed it back. Her fingers lingered just a moment too long on the edge. "She drew me." "She likes you," he said quietly. Aubrey didn't smile. Her eyes dipped. "I'm not great at staying in the picture." "She doesn't know that." Maybe she should. Something tightened between them then. Not quite a rift. Not yet. Just that sharp awareness that maybe something had started growing where no one meant to plant anything. And now they had no idea what it might become. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of cold spring morning where the sun showed up but didn't bother sticking around. The diner was half full, just enough people to keep Aubrey moving without thinking too much. She had her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, apron smudged with coffee and syrup. She was halfway to clearing a booth when the door chimed, and the sound caught her mid-step. He walked in like he still had the right to. Crisp shirt, trimmed beard, leather shoes that had never seen a gravel road. Colin. With a bouquet of lilies clutched in one hand and something heavier in the other, an envelope thick with bad intentions. Aubrey didn't move. Her whole body went still in that way people freeze before a crash. He spotted her, offered the kind of smile that once worked on her mother and the pastor, and anyone who hadn't seen it up close long enough to know better. She didn't take the flowers. He set them on the counter anyway. "I'm not here to fight," he said, voice low and sweet like he was talking her off a ledge he'd built. "Just wanted to talk. Smooth things over." Aubrey glanced at the envelope in his hand. "You brought a lawyer." "Just paperwork, nothing dramatic. You left things messy." "I meant to." Someone cleared their throat in the back, Evan wiping his hands on a rag by the coffee station. He hadn't been watching, not exactly, but he hadn't looked away either. Colin followed her eyes, saw Evan, smirked. "He the new reason?" Aubrey didn't flinch. "He's none of your business." "You walked out before the vows, Aubrey. That's not nothing." "No," she said, voice sharper now. "That was everything." Colin set the envelope down next to the lilies and left with a look that said this wasn't over. The door slammed harder than necessary. Aubrey stood still a second longer, then swept the flowers into the trash. The envelope followed. Evan said nothing, just watched her from the counter, jaw tight, chest hollow with something he hadn't named yet. She went back to bussing tables like it hadn't broken something open, but Evan saw it, all of it, and the quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure. Building. Waiting. Evan didn't stop showing up, he just stopped staying. He still came to the diner, same booth by the window, same order. But his coffee stayed fuller than it used to. His glances didn't linger. When Aubrey brought the eggs, he didn't meet her eyes, just said thanks with a voice stripped down to polite. She noticed. Of course she did. He stopped walking Mia to the door at school, too, dropped her off in the pickup line like clockwork, truck idling, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Sometimes Aubrey would be there, helping with art setup or field day snacks, sleeves rolled and hair tied back, always moving, always trying not to look like she was waiting for something. She never approached, just nodded if she caught his eye. He usually looked away before that happened. She didn't ask what changed, didn't press. She just pulled the walls tighter around herself, the ones she thought she'd started taking down, rebuilt them brick by brick, in silence. At home, Evan told himself it was safer this way, less confusing, easier for Mia, easier for him. You didn't risk breaking things that never got close enough to be held. He kept busy, took on extra shifts, cleaned tools that didn't need it, fixed a fence no one used. He answered Mia's questions with half smiles and changed the subject whenever she brought up the drawing again, the one with the 3 of them. She probably doesn't even remember, he'd say. Mia would shrug, unconvinced. Aubrey kept showing up anyway, not in ways you could call chasing, just there, steady. Like someone who didn't want anything, but didn't know how to disappear either. She stayed late at the school fundraiser, sorted supplies at the food pantry, helped Miss Adele fix the heater at the library without being asked. People started liking her, trusting her. The same ones who whispered before now asked for her opinion on paint colors and pie recipes. She kept her head down, didn't let it soften her too much. Because even if Evan wasn't saying it out loud, she'd seen the shift. And the part that hurt the most wasn't that he pulled away, it was how quietly he did it. Like he didn't expect her to notice, like he hoped she would, but didn't know what to do if she did. The truck gave out at the worst possible moment, halfway between the school and the main road, in the narrow stretch where the signal always cut out and the shoulder barely existed. Evan had 3 kids in the back seat, all hyped up on juice boxes and field trip adrenaline, and Mia sitting up front, already tugging at her seatbelt like she could will them forward. The engine sputtered once, then again, then stopped altogether, a long, low groan that felt less mechanical and more like a sigh. Evan swore under his breath, guided them to the edge of the road, and popped the hood like it mattered. It didn't. He knew that sound. Starter was gone. Again. Because he'd put off replacing it. Again. The sky was the color of unfinished business. One of the boys in the back asked if they were going to die here. Mia rolled her eyes and told him to relax. Evan closed the hood slower than he meant to and pulled out his phone. No signal, of course. He turned back to the truck, bracing himself to explain to 4 sugar sticky kids that they were about to enjoy a thrilling roadside nature experience when a car rolled up behind them. Clean sedan, tires crunching gravel. Aubrey. She didn't get out right away, just rolled the window down and leaned over the passenger seat. Need a lift? Evan hesitated. Mia didn't. She flung the door open and grinned. Dad's truck is being dumb again, she said. Can we ride with you? Aubrey's eyes flicked to Evan. No gloating, no smirk. Just the same quiet steadiness she always carried. There's room. They crammed in. Kids squished into the back with too many limbs and one spilled snack pouch. Evan climbed in last. He didn't say thank you. She didn't ask him to. The music was low, some gentle guitar threaded with a voice that didn't demand attention. The window on her side was cracked, wind curling through the car, soft and cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and the sharp edge of coming rain. They rode in silence for a while, until one of the kids asked if she was Evan's girlfriend. No, she said, eyes on the road. Just someone who shows up sometimes. Evan didn't correct her, didn't say much at all, but he didn't look away either. The night was warm, but not stifling. the kind of summer air that held still long enough to feel sacred. Crickets sang low from the tall grass, and fireflies blinked in erratic golden pulses, like the stars had come down just close enough for Mia to chase them. She ran barefoot through the field behind the garage, giggling every time she nearly caught one, arms stretched like flight might be possible if she just tried hard enough. Evan sat on the hood of the truck, legs stretched out, palms flat behind him, staring at the sky like it had answers. Aubrey climbed up beside him, slower, the creak of the metal familiar now, almost comforting. She brought 2 sodas from the cooler and handed him one. He took it, nodded, but didn't crack it open. They watched Mia for a while in silence. "She's good for you," Aubrey said finally. Her voice was soft but certain, like the truth it held didn't need volume. "She's better than I deserve," Evan murmured. "You're what she needs. That counts." He didn't answer, just let the fizz from the unopened can hiss against his grip. Aubrey leaned back, head tilted toward the stars. "I used to think this kind of quiet only happened after something was lost," she said. "But maybe it's what comes before something gets found." Evan looked at her, really looked. Her hair had slipped from its braid, curling around her cheeks. There was a freckle just below her jawline he hadn't noticed before. She turned to him, eyes not wide with hope, but open with something braver. She leaned in, just enough. And he stopped her, not with a word, just a breath, a shift, a flinch too subtle to call out loud, but enough to freeze the air between them. She pulled back slowly, didn't hide the hurt, didn't mask it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not," she replied. "I can't give you what you had." Her mouth tugged into a quiet, crooked smile. "I didn't want what I had." He looked down. She stayed beside him, and the fireflies kept blinking, as if to say, "Not yet, but maybe." The envelope was plain, cream-colored, unassuming. Tucked between an oil change coupon and a utility bill on the kitchen table, it could have been anything. It wasn't. Evan stared at it for a long time before he touched it. His name printed clean and official, like it belonged to someone more composed. The return address read like static in his chest. Family Court, 3rd District. He didn't open it at first, just stood there in the kitchen, hands braced on either side of the table, like it might shift under the weight of what he hadn't read yet. When he finally tore it open, the air changed, thickened, like a storm had moved through the room without sound. The language was stiff, formal. Buried in it were words that didn't belong in his home: concern for well-being, petition for review, alleged instability. Beneath that, names he hadn't seen in years. Mia's maternal grandparents. They wanted partial custody. They claimed the environment wasn't stable, that Evan's income was unpredictable, that Mia needed more structure, more support, more opportunity. More. Always more. Evan stood still, the pages shaking in his hand. He couldn't tell if it was anger or fear. Mia was upstairs, singing to herself, some nonsense tune from a cartoon he didn't know. Her footsteps thumped across the ceiling, happy, light, innocent. They didn't know her laugh. They didn't know the way she counted fireflies out loud, or how she wrote notes for the lunchbox he packed her every morning, even though they always ended up crumpled. They didn't know how she still slipped her hand into his at school drop-off like she wasn't too old for it yet. They hadn't shown up for her, not once, not when her mother left, not when Evan was learning how to braid her hair with shaking hands and YouTube tutorials, not when he sat up late at night listening for her breath because she'd had a nightmare she didn't want to talk about. But now that she was thriving, now that she laughed more days than she didn't, they wanted in. He sank into the chair like his legs had stopped holding him. There was no one to yell at, no one to blame except time and grief, and the world for giving paperwork the power to question love. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, Evan read the letter again and again. And it didn't get easier. The diner was quieter than usual, the lull between dinner and the late-night crowd that never quite came in this town. Evan sat at his usual booth, coffee going cold between his hands. He hadn't touched the eggs. They sat there, cooling under the hum of fluorescent light. Across the room, Aubrey moved from table to table, polite, practiced, but not present. She'd known something was off the moment he walked in. No small talk, no half smile, just the slump of his shoulders, the kind of weight you only carry when you're losing something you can't afford to. When she finally made her way over, she didn't ask what was wrong, just topped off his mug and slid into the booth across from him like she belonged there. He didn't look at her, just muttered, "Mia's grandparents filed for custody." The words landed heavy. She didn't speak right away, let the weight sit where it needed to. Then, quietly, "What are they saying? That I can't give her enough, that I'm unstable, that she deserves better." "Bullshit," she said too loud. A couple of heads turned. She didn't care. He looked up then, jaw tight. "It's not just about what's true, it's about what sounds true." Aubrey's hands curled into fists on the table. "Then let me speak for you." Evan blinked. "What?" "Let me testify. As a witness. I've seen you. With Mia, with this town. You're more of a home than most people ever get." He shook his head before she even finished. "No." "Evan?" "No." His voice was sharp now, final. "You don't need to get dragged into this, into my mess." She stared at him, the silence stretched, tight and brittle. "You think this is charity?" she asked quietly. "You think I'm offering because I pity you?" He didn't answer, didn't know how. Her chair scraped back, slow and painful. She stood, the look in her eyes not angry, but hurt, deeply, precisely. "I thought you saw me better than that," she said. She left early, apron half untied, the back door slamming softly behind her. Evan didn't stop her. He just sat there, watching the place she'd been, like something important had walked out and taken the air with it. The courthouse was colder than he expected, not physically, though the air conditioner groaned like it had been running since winter, but in the way people avoided eye contact, in the way the walls echoed too easily. Evan stood just outside the courtroom doors for a long minute, his reflection caught in the pane of safety glass. His shirt collar itched. The borrowed jacket didn't quite fit across the shoulders. The lawyer assigned to him, fresh-faced and kind, in the way people are when they know they are underpaid, had told him to keep calm, speak simply, stay respectful. But how do you simplify raising a daughter on your own with nothing but 2 hands and a garage full of barely running cars? Inside, the grandparents sat straight-backed and silent, flanked by a lawyer who wore a suit that probably cost more than Evan's truck. They didn't look at him when he entered, just whispered to each other like they'd already decided the outcome. He kept his hands folded in his lap. Let them say their piece. They used words like stability, academic consistency, future potential. They said things that sounded good on paper, things that weren't untrue, just incomplete. When it was his turn, Evan stood, the room blurred at the edges. "I'm not perfect," he said. "I don't own a house. Sometimes dinner's eggs and toast. But Mia knows she's safe. She knows I'll be there, every day, every morning, every night. I don't leave." His voice cracked then, but he didn't stop. "She's my whole world, that's it." And then she walked in. Aubrey. No warning, no announcement. Just the door creaking open and her silhouette pausing before she stepped into the room. She didn't look at Evan when she passed, just took a seat in the back, quiet and calm. The judge glanced her way. "Miss?" She stood slowly. "Aubrey Lewis. I'd like to speak." The lawyer tried to object. The judge waved him down. Aubrey's voice was steady, unshaken. "I've seen a lot of parents quit when things get hard. But Evan?" She looked at him now. "He shows up, every time. That's what a parent does. No frills, no performance, just truth." The judge nodded, took notes. 3 weeks later, the letter came. Custody remained unchanged. And Mia? She never knew how close she came to being taken. But Evan did, and so did Aubrey. It was taped to the door. No knock, no call, just paper and ink, fluttering slightly in the late afternoon breeze like it hadn't already changed everything. Evan saw it as he pulled into the driveway, Mia asleep in the back seat with her face pressed to the window, hair tangled from the wind. He stepped out slowly, careful not to wake her, eyes locked on the folded envelope, like it might vanish if he looked away. His name was written in careful script, not rushed, not cold, just steady. He knew that handwriting, had seen it on napkins left with his coffee, on sticky notes taped to supply lists at the school, always Aubrey's, always quiet but sure. He peeled it from the door with a hand that felt suddenly too clumsy. Inside the house, the air was still and too warm. He sat at the kitchen table, unfolded the letter, and read. Evan, I've taken a job in the city, a small publishing house. It's not glamorous, but it's something steady, something clean. I didn't want to leave like this, but I didn't want to stay just because you couldn't ask me to. You were never the mess, Evan. I was. Still am. But I've learned how to carry it better. I just need to carry it somewhere else for a while. Tell Mia thank you. For the drawing. I kept it. Tell her she made this place feel like a home again. Even if I never fully walked through the front door. Take care of each other. A. He read it twice, then again, folded it carefully, and set it beside his mug. The house felt quieter than usual, not empty, just paused, like it was waiting to see what he'd do next. He looked out the window. The sky was cloudless, the gravel road still. No tire marks, no sign she'd been there at all. But she had been, and now she was gone. And that hurt more than he wanted to admit, because it didn't feel like a door closing. It felt like one never fully opened in time. It was half swallowed by weeds and sunburned grass, the barn. Slouched at the edge of the Lewis property line, like it had given up asking to be remembered. The red paint was almost all gone, bleached to a tired pink in places, weather-stripped down to bare wood in others. One of the side panels had peeled off completely, exposing the ribs of the frame like bone. Evan hadn't meant to stop. He was just driving, nowhere in particular. Maybe hoping the road would point him toward something that made sense. Maybe hoping he'd see her car on some back road shoulder, engine ticking, arms crossed, waiting for someone to say she didn't have to keep going. But instead, he saw the barn. He pulled over without thinking, killed the engine and stepped out, gravel crunching under boots that suddenly felt too heavy. The front doors hung crooked, barely holding to rusted hinges. He pried one open, stepped into the dark. Dust danced in the slanted light, pouring through the broken roof. It smelled like cedar and thyme, old wood, soil, a memory soaked too long in silence. There was a ladder collapsed in the corner, an old workbench, and there, near the back wall, a nail-pierced board with a hand-scrawled sign above it in faded marker, Event Supplies, Dad says someday. Evan exhaled hard, his breath fogged in the cooler air inside the barn, then vanished. He didn't leave. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He brought tools, lumber, patched the front door first, then braced the sagging beams with new supports, measuring twice, cutting once, the way his father taught him. He worked slow, intentional, not for efficiency, but for care. The kind you offer when you know someone once loved something enough to dream through it. By the end of the week, one half of the roof was solid. The leaks stopped dripping. The structure no longer moaned every time the wind shifted. Evan didn't say her name, not once. But each nail he drove in sounded like a word he hadn't let himself say. Stay. Come back. I see you, he kept going, because healing doesn't start with hope. It starts with hammers. The morning started like any other, coffee too strong, toast too dark, Mia humming something tuneless under her breath as she dug through her backpack for a pencil that didn't exist. Evan was halfway through untangling her shoelaces when the mail slid through the front door slot with a soft hiss and a hollow thunk. He almost didn't check it. Most days the mail was just another list of things he couldn't afford to care about. Flyers, bills, reminders of things that took too long to fix. But something about the weight of it, just one envelope, cream-colored, heavy, made him pause. No return address, his name printed in careful handwriting that knew its own pressure. He stood at the counter, thumbs brushing the edge. Mia was still talking behind him, something about a science project and needing vinegar. He didn't hear any of it. Not really. The seal cracked softly. Inside was a single card. No frills, no flowers. You're invited to a wedding. It's not mine, but I'll be there. I'd like it if you were too. There was no signature. None needed. He read it once, then again, slower. The words didn't sting. Not exactly. But they pressed into the ribs, into the hollows that had learned how to hold emptiness without complaint. He set the card down, turned it over like it might offer more. It didn't. Mia came into the kitchen and grabbed an apple from the counter. "Dad, you okay?" He looked at her, blinking back into the moment. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Yeah, I'm good." But he wasn't sure what he was. Not really. Months had passed since she left. Seasons had changed. The barn was standing again. Quiet, solid, waiting for something it didn't know how to ask for. He'd told himself he was fine with it. That some people came into your life just long enough to leave it cleaner than they found it. But the invitation said otherwise. Because she hadn't sent it out of obligation. She'd sent it because maybe, just maybe, there was still room for a different kind of beginning, one that didn't come dressed in white, one that didn't need vows to feel real. The gravel crunched beneath his boots, slow and deliberate, every step a quiet negotiation with himself. Evan hadn't meant to bring Mia, not at first, but when she found the invitation on the counter, she'd looked at him with those wide, unshakable eyes and said, "It's a wedding, Dad. You don't leave people alone at weddings." So he let her braid her hair, wear the dress with the sunflower buttons, and pack a drawing she folded like it was sacred. Now she walked beside him, small hand in his, tugging gently every few steps as if that might speed up his courage. The venue came into view slowly, just past the tree line, where the old Lewis barn used to slump like a forgotten promise. Now it stood upright, clean, the red paint restored, not too bright, weathered just enough to keep its history honest. String lights crisscrossed the rafters. The grass had been mowed into neat paths. Wildflowers filled mason jars like someone had arranged them without trying too hard. It didn't look like a place people ran from anymore. It looked like a place they chose. Guests were scattered across the lawn in linen and laughter, sipping from mismatched glasses, leaning into stories. Evan scanned the crowd, not for her exactly, but for some sign she still lived in the same skin he remembered. And then she stepped out from the side door. No veil, no lace. Just soft slate-blue fabric that moved with the breeze and caught the light, like memory. Her hair was loose, longer now. She carried a clipboard in one hand, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at him, and everything in her face softened, like tension easing from the shoulders, like forgiveness might be possible, even if it hadn't been asked for yet. Mia waved, bold and bright. Aubrey smiled, small but real. Then she set the clipboard down and walked toward them like it was the most natural thing in the world, like time hadn't pulled them apart, only set the pieces where they needed to land. And for the first time in months, Evan exhaled without bracing for the pain. The cake had been cut, half eaten and forgotten, in favor of conversation and clinking glasses. The sun hung low, catching the tops of the trees in that brief, golden hush that comes just before the world exhales into night. Laughter floated like lanterns across the lawn, soft and scattered, fading as the music shifted to something slower. Strings and silence. No lyrics, just the kind of melody that made people pause. Evan stood near the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, watching Mia twirl barefoot near the dance floor, her sunflower dress stained with juice and grass. She didn't care. Kids never did. She laughed and danced like there was nothing waiting for her but more light. Aubrey stood by the tree line, arms folded gently across her waist, talking to one of the caterers, nodding with that calm certainty she carried when everything else was unsure. She'd been moving all day, always 5 steps ahead, checking lights, guiding guests, adjusting tablecloths that caught the breeze too often. He'd watched her in motion, but always from a distance. Until now, he walked toward her slow. No rush, just the steady pull of something long overdue. She noticed him before he said anything, her eyes lifting like she'd expected him. He stopped in front of her, said nothing for a beat. Then, with a breath steadier than he felt, held out his hand. She looked at it, then at him, then back at his hand. "I don't dance," he said, voice quiet, "but I figured it doesn't have to be good, just honest." She didn't hesitate. She slipped off her shoes and took his hand. They stepped onto the grass. No proper dance floor, just earth and chance and whatever music was still playing. His hand settled on her back, hers on his shoulder. They moved slow, out of rhythm, in step only with the ache they'd been carrying. She leaned in, voice close enough to send a shiver through the space between them. "I thought you didn't know how to give someone a life," she whispered. He pulled her a little closer. "Turns out I just needed the right someone to give it to." The box wasn't velvet. It was an old Altoids tin, edges worn silver, lid creaking when it opened. Evan had scrubbed it clean, lined the inside with a scrap of Mia's old flannel shirt, and tucked it into his pocket like it might burn through if he held onto it too long. The vineyard was quiet that evening, off-season. The guests had gone, the chairs were stacked in the barn, and the last of the fairy lights blinked sleepily in the breeze. Aubrey was on the porch, a cup of tea cupped between her palms, hair loose and tucked behind one ear. She looked up when she heard his boots on the steps, not surprised, just expectant. That had become a thing between them, knowing before being told. He sat next to her without speaking at first, looked out at the rows of dormant vines, the horizon fading into soft blue. The air held that edge of cold that made you tuck closer to someone, not because you had to, but because you could. She reached over, slid her fingers into his. "You've been quiet. Thinking. That's always dangerous." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Not yet. He pulled the tin from his pocket and handed it to her wordlessly. She blinked, eyebrows lifted. "Is this? Are you giving me mints?" "Just open it." She did, and inside, resting against that worn piece of flannel, was an ignition key. Old, shiny, familiar. Aubrey stared at it for a moment too long, then looked at him. Something caught between disbelief and laughter, already brewing behind her eyes. "You rebuilt it?" she whispered. "It's the one from the truck, the night we met." She looked at him again, softer now. He cleared his throat, voice lower than usual. "I don't have a ring, not the kind people expect, but I figured this started it. You, me, that truck." Her eyes shimmered, lips parted in a breath she didn't quite let go. "You changed my route, Aubrey," he said. "I didn't know where I was going until I broke down, and there you were." She closed the tin, leaned into him, and whispered into his collarbone, "I'm still here." The sun filtered through the branches of the old oak, warm and dappled, like it was trying to give them its quiet blessing. The breeze was gentle, barely there, enough to rustle the leaves, but not enough to steal the ribbons Mia had tied to the wooden arch Evan built the week before. Crooked, a little uneven, but standing. There weren't many chairs, just a few rows, mismatched, borrowed from neighbors and friends who didn't need explanations. They brought pies and flowers and folding fans and called it a miracle without needing to say the word. Aubrey stood beneath the oak in a dress the color of worn paper, simple, soft, nothing showy. Her hair was down, wind-blown and honest. Evan was already there, in a white button-down rolled to the elbows, the ignition key tied to a leather cord around his wrist. They didn't have a minister, just Miss Adele from the library, who got ordained online and cried twice while practicing. And Mia. Mia stood between them with a piece of notebook paper folded 4 times and smoothed out like it mattered more than anything she'd ever written. Her voice shook at first. Then it didn't. "I don't really know how vows work," she said, "but I know how people work. My dad used to think he had to fix everything with tools. And Aubrey, you didn't try to fix anything. You just sat with us while we figured it out." She looked up at them, eyes bright. "So my vow is that I'll always remind you when you forget how you found each other when things were broken, and how you stayed." She giggled, wiped her nose on her wrist, and stepped back. Evan blinked fast. Aubrey took his hand. They hadn't written traditional vows, didn't need them, just years of silence and storms and moments that spoke louder than anything they could say now. He touched her cheek, thumb brushing the edge of her jaw like he was still afraid it would all vanish, and she leaned in, close enough only he could hear. "This time," she whispered, voice shaking, "I walked toward something." And for the first time in his life, Evan didn't brace himself to be left. The rain had stopped hours ago, but its scent still clung to everything: wet earth, pine needles, the lingering sweetness of grass that hadn't been cut in too long. The world looked rinsed, not new exactly, but softened, like it had been forgiven. The porch light buzzed overhead, casting a warm circle that reached just far enough to catch the edge of the steps, the tips of their boots, and the faint shimmer on the gravel drive where puddles hadn't yet dried. The barn stood sturdy in the distance, all sharp lines and clean paint, humming with quiet music someone had forgotten to turn off. Jazz, probably. One of the soft vinyls Aubrey liked to put on when she thought no one was listening. They sat close, the three of them, wrapped in a quilt Mia had insisted they all fit under. It was too small, patched together from old t-shirts and faded flannel, but it held them anyway. Aubrey leaned into Evan's side, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm looped around her like he'd always known that's where it belonged. Mia curled up between them, her feet tucked under her father's leg, one hand holding a pencil she hadn't used in over an hour. No one was in a hurry to speak. The quiet wasn't awkward anymore. It was the kind you earned. Out past the fence, near the edge of the property, the sapling stood crooked but rooted, still wet from the storm, its leaves glinting under the porch light when the wind moved just right. They'd planted it together a month ago. Evan had dug the hole. Mia had chosen the spot. Aubrey had whispered something into the soil before they covered the roots, something she never repeated. Evan glanced toward it now, watching how it stood despite the wind, despite the rain. He turned to Aubrey. She met his eyes, no smile this time, just the kind of peace that settles when you're exactly where you're meant to be. "We made it," he said, more to himself than anyone else. She nodded. "Yeah," she murmured. "Not clean, not easy, but we did." Mia yawned, leaned into them both. And under the glow of a porch light and a sky that had finally cleared, they held still in the middle of the life they'd built, imperfect, earned, and entirely their own.